So now we're in the cellar, obviously. And what sort of, so when we've just passed some crates of grapes outside, what's the, I mean, not every step of the process, but the basic process for when the grapes come in after that stage?
Well, like I say, our methods have slowly changed as we've sort of changed the viticulture, and we've sort of learned, in the first years, we sort of followed it by the book. It was like, I've never made sparkling wine until we started this place. I was a red winemaker, so I was focused on, Shiraz, Merlot, Cabernets, these sort of things. So knowing this is a new discipline.
You had some help from Tony Jordan, I think.
We did. We were very, very lucky
Just
in the early years. Tony came and saw us, our first harvest, I think just before we picked our first harvest. So he hadn't tried a wine, he hadn't made juice, but he loved the sites, and he really, we thought, okay, it's good to see it a visit. And then he just kept coming back, twice a year, and he'd sort of give us a 2-week notice. I'm around. Do you want to hook up? And we would just like throw wines at him, and he became our mentor pretty quickly. And we had a good sort of 6 years before he sadly passed away. And
must feel even more priceless now.
It does. And I think I credit him a lot with getting us off the ground so quickly, and he helped us to understand more than anything. What are we looking for in base wines, and how does that translate into the finished product down the line? Because if you've never done it before, it's a very different discipline to still wine. So he was absolutely critical. And so our methods are actually, we sort of followed a very sort of reductive method in the early years. So, sulfur at the press, keeping oxygen out, at every available moment. But we've really sort of moved away from that. As the juice comes in, no sulfur at all. In fact, we promote, it's a bit sort of the Moet Hennessy method, really. We promote oxygen getting into the juice. We don't hyperox like they do in sort of in the New World.
Yep.
We don't have as many phenolics potentially as they do in the New World, but we like to get a lot of oxygen in, get the juice browning, especially for the Pinots, because it really helps to drop out the colour if it browns. And if it's destined for a wild ferment, we don't add any sulfur at all. So we tend to, most of our fermentations in barrel are wild, but this year we're bringing in a few more wild ferments, and it probably won't be long until we're 100%, but it's slowly does it. Would you like to try some juice?
Would love to.
So this is Chardonnay that has literally just come in today. So this is fresh out of the press. So if you can see that sort of brown.
Yeah.
So that's oxygen's got in it. If we'd put sulfur in it, it'd be sort of white, sort of yellowy. But what you find is, this will stay brown until sort of midway through.
I'd say it looks more natural, but that's going to be misinterpreted these days, isn't it?
No, exactly. It will stay like this until sort of midway through fermentation. Then all the sort of oxidized phenolics drop out. Yeah. By the end of fermentation, it's beautifully
amazing,
clear.
isn't it?
Yeah. So it's a bit of magic, really. Natural magic. Yeah.
It's funny because that oxidation has affected the aromas for the time being as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, they disappear. But this is what Tony was like, trust. You have to trust in the process. The aromas go, especially when you're hyperox, it kills it. But then, what we're essentially doing is immunizing the wine against oxygenation later down the line. So, if we put sulfur early, yes, it'd be fresh, it'd be aromatic, but give it 4 or 5 years, those phenolic compounds eventually will oxidize.
Yep.
But they'll do it in bottle, and they'll do it 3 or 4 years down the line. And that's what we're essentially doing. We're avoiding that slow oxidation. So we lose the aromas now, but they always come back.
That's fascinating. Yeah. I've only just realised I can never have tasted a browned must before. Yeah. Because always before I taste a must at this stage, and there is a certain grapiness to it, and that it stifled that.
Exactly.
Gosh, I can see why you've got to
trust in your grapes. You've got to trust in the grapes.
Trust in grapes and nature.
But again, once you've done it once and you see the result, then it gives you confidence that you're sort of doing the right thing, and it always comes back. So have faith. That's the key.
Okay.
Yeah.
Still very tasty.
Yeah. Would you like to try some Meunier?
Yes, please.
stick it down there.
But it's interesting because I'm just not used to tasting wines at this stage, but the acid level doesn't seem as quite as high as I was expecting.
Because of the high sugar level. So
Yep.
that's one.
It's
one.
balancing.
It masks in a way.
It's
When you get,
yeah.
I don't think we're going to have to chaptalize any liquids this year, which I think will be a first.
Yeah.
What you notice, the higher, certainly in the unriper years, also maybe not unripe, lower sugar years, because your sugar level is a lot lower, the acid stands out a lot more. Then you chaptalize it, and then the acid drops. You're like, well, what's it's a bit like dosage.
Sure
trying to
right.
mask
the masking effect.
acid with dosage. It's a similar effect in ripe grape juice. But this is the beauty of our climate. The chalk is getting that big flavour ripeness and retaining acid, and that's where chalk plays quite a critical role. And that's where our climate is so suited to sparkling wines.
It is. I meant to ask that in the vineyard actually, because I'm always struck by how stony your vineyard is. I love that because you think of flint and everything in the vineyard. How close is the chalk to the surface? How far do you have to
Well,
go?
we sit on what's called a gravel terrace. So at the top flat here, that's sort of your alluvial deposits. So we've got about, where we stood here, it could be 1.5 meters of clay and flint. There's a layer of sand and gravel mixed in there as well. And the further you go down the hill, it gets less and less and less. And then you get to the Chardonnay, and it's essentially pure chalk.
Right.
So we've, the two wines that we're gonna try later. You've got the Pinot Noir, which is a mixture of clay and chalk, and then the Blanc de Blanc, the Chardonnay, is pure chalk. And we've sort of tried to fit the variety onto the bits of land we think is most suited for them. Yeah.
Excellent.
The Meunier is a special, it's the one variety I always wish I had more of in this country.
It's really flavoursome at this stage.
It's very intense.
It has. It's got more. Nice. I suppose I'm not used to describing must. I'm used to trying to describe wine.
It's very. I mean, ultimately, it's very difficult to get a handle on what you're gonna. You have to take everything you try at this with a pinch of salt. It's more. Experience tells you which parts of the vineyard are going to translate into, I think we've had sort of 12 years now learning the site, and the sort of art of blending has sort of diminished because experience tells us that this part of the vineyard always makes the best sort of long-aged Blanc de Blanc. So it's almost pre-blended before it even comes into the wine. Yes, there's a bit of vintage variation, but the blending process. So we know the journey these wines are going to take before they even come in. So, and that's just experience. Yeah.
That's delicious. It's really easy to taste at this stage.
Yeah, don't drink too much of it. It's not great for the stomach.
So, and when would these start fermenting? When do you expect them to start?
So the big difference is, this one's actually had a tiny bit of sulfur in. This will actually stay in tank, whereas this component here, this has had no sulfur, and this evening we're going to transfer that straight into barrel, and then in a couple of days we're going to inoculate it with our Pierre de Cuve, and then we've trialed in the past letting them ferment on their own naturally, but they can sit around potentially for a week before they, and that is a risky sort of strategy. So we've gone down the Pierre de Cuve technique. So we, a couple of weeks ago when we were sampling the grapes to for analysis, we started to collate some juice, which that became our starter culture. We've just inoculated some wine with that starter culture. Once that gets going, we'll put roughly 3% of that Pierre de Cuve in each of our barrels, and that will help it get going. And that way, the wine doesn't sit around too long uninoculated.
If you're not fussed about the wine browning in the first place, why is there a risk to it sitting around?
Because without the sulfur, without that protection, stuff in the wine can, it gives things a chance, bacteria, acetic
okay,
bacteria.
I was thinking acetic.
It's mainly acetic bacteria can get a hold.
Yep.
You know, once it's fermenting, the yeast take over. You know, that's fine. But it's that period, that lag phase at the beginning of the fermentation. If it's too long, you do risk bacteria, acetic bacteria getting in. So the more we can minimise that lag phase with a starter culture, the better.
I know you haven't got any wine in barrels yet, or even must in barrels yet, but can we just go and have a look at them? Because I noticed you don't use barrels of normal sizes, do you?
No, we've changed our methods for that as well. So I'll show you.
Fantastic.
So in the early years, one thing that Tony Jordan was quite adamant in those early years, we say, you know, try and incorporate some oak fermentation in your fermentation as soon as you can to build up character, sort of complexity. To be honest, it was already on my mind, you know, having worked with red wine for so long, you know, I didn't really want to give up the barrel as a form of fermentation. We were quite lucky in the early days. We got, you know, had a good source of old white barrels from a winery in Bordeaux. So we got them when they were about 6-7 years old, and we started building up our collection of barrels, part fermentation, but part holding our reserve in as well. But we found after a while that, you know, there was a sort of finite amount of time that you could leave your base wine in a 225 barrique. Yep. So I was quite keen to experiment with some larger formats. So we did use some 300s, some hogsheads initially, and then we trialed some larger pungeons. We got in a selection of cooperages, but it was quite clear that it was the Segans, these icon barrels, for whatever reason, they much finer grain, untoasted heads, and they just seem to bring out the best in the wines.
And these are 450?
These are 500s.
They're 500s.
These are 500s. So the larger the vessel, the lower the sort of wine to wood ratio. Okay. So this evening, that Meunier, we will put it into here, leave a bit of ullage, and then tomorrow we'll inoculate it with our Pierre de Cuve. And it'll take a good 2 or 3 days to start bubbling away. One of the reasons I like wild ferments is they go really, really slowly. They take their time. You know, if you inoculate, they go very, very fast. They get very, very hot. You can burn off, you know, because there's no temperature regulation on these barrels. There's a risk you can burn off aromatics. But with a wild ferment, they go really, really slowly. They don't get too hot. Yes, they can last a week, 2 weeks longer than normal, but it's a very calm fermentation. It keeps resuspending that yeast lees, so you get this sort of lovely textural element. 2 wines we're going to taste now. You know, both have got about 50% barrel fermentation in them, with an increasing element of these 500 litres. You know, we are slowly moving to 100% barrel fermentation, but we have to be careful to not go too fast, too quickly, because it might dominate the style.
Lovely taste in the must, but it'd also be lovely to taste some of the finished
final
wines.
product. Okay,
excellent.
let's go and taste.
All right.